Now, today we're going to talk about how to solve log problems. Now, before we talk about solving log problems, we need to kind of talk about domain. So we have three graphs here. First, e to the x, or any kind of exponential. First, you ask yourself, what is the domain for e to the x, or any kind of exponential? That is all real numbers. Now, what about a log graph? What is the domain on this one? Well, you can see that the x values or the graph really only exist on the right-hand side of the y-axis, and so this is x greater than 0. So keep that in mind. Now, let's look at this one, x squared. What is the domain on this one? Well, you can see that this graph exists on both sides of the y-axis, except there's nothing on the y-axis, meaning there's a asymptote. So this is x not equal to 0. And so when you see this kind of problem, what you need to remember is that log this part has to be greater than 0. So whatever you solve, that answer has to be greater than 0. And for this one with the squared, it's just that this number cannot be 0. All right, so that's a lot of information, and we need to use this information to help us solve log problems. So let's look at some problems. All right, so let's look at this problem. Log x squared equals 2. We got to figure out what x is equal to. Well, for all the log questions, the first thing you have to do is ask yourself, what is the domain? Well, we already talked about this before, that this domain is just x not equal to 0. Okay, so let's go ahead and solve it. I'm going to show you two ways to solve, one being correct, the other one is a very close way to solve it, but it's actually going to yield only half of the answer. Okay, so this log is a base 10 because it has no base. So in order to get rid of this log, we need the same base, but in the exponent form. So we need base 10 on both sides. That cancels this out. So we have x squared equals to 10 squared. Well, 10 squared is just 100. All right, how do I solve for x? I'm going to square root both sides. So x is equal to plus minus 10. All right, so remember we checked domain. If the answer is not 0, then that is the correct answer, and so plus minus 10 is the answer. Or sorry, are the answers. Now let's compare it to another way of solving it, which is not exactly correct. This is a little tricky here. All right, what if you didn't solve it this way? You didn't see that, oh, this is a base 10, I need to get rid of it by using exponent base 10 on both sides. What if you saw it and you said, oh, you know what, I'm going to bring this 2 down. And I'm going to just divide by 2. And then I realized, oh, you know what, I can raise both sides by 10. Then you only got one answer instead of 2. So how did that happen? Well, this is kind of tricky. The original problem has a 2, which means it's a squared problem. Squared problem means that you're probably going to have 2 answers, at least have 2 answers to begin with, and then you can check if one of them is not correct. But when you change this problem, now you have a power of 1, so you were only able to solve for one answer. So that tells you this is not the right way to solve things, and you got to be careful there. All right, that's a lot of information. Let's go ahead and solve this one. We have this log plus this log minus this log equals to 0. We got to find x. So this is very hard, but I'm going to show you the easy way to solve this. First, we got to check domain. We have 3 logs, so whatever answer we get has to work in all 3 logs. And remember, each log can only have number that's greater than 0. So what we're going to do is take each one and make it greater than 0. Kind of like how you do, square root questions. It's the same idea. Check for domain. All right, so let's look at the first one. 3x minus 2 is greater than 0. So we got to find x. Or sorry, what x is greater than. x is greater than 2/3. All right, let's do the same for all of the logs. All right, let's look at them. So here's the thing. Here's is this, same idea as when we had it at the very beginning of the year when we said we're looking at three functions combined together. We're looking for the picky eater. Okay, so out of these three that have to go together, who is the pickiest eater? Who can take the least amount of numbers? Well, this is greater than 2/3. This is greater than 1. This is greater than 0. So who has the least amount of numbers? That is this one, greater than 1. So this one wins, and whatever answer we solve for has to be greater than 1. I'm going to skip solving this graphically because I think solving it algebraically is much faster. All right, let's rewrite the question. Okay, in order to solve this question, we got to combine all the logs into one. So that means take out your skills from the 3.4 section. How do I simplify them into one big log? Well, remember the key in simplifying them is you need to, if there's a plus, okay, first you got to make sure all the logs have the same base, which they do. If there's a plus, that's a multiply. If there's a minus, that's a divide. However, there is a coefficient in the front, so I got to get rid of that first. So that becomes an exponent. I'm going to just rewrite this problem first. All right, now this adding becomes a multiply. This minus becomes a divide. All right, we get to this point and you might say, wow, that's still very hard to solve. Don't worry, we can do this. Okay, so to get rid of this log, we need the same base. Well, that base is e, so we're going to raise both sides by e. That cancels, so we just get a 3x minus 2 times x minus 1 over x squared. E to the 0 is 1. All right, how do I solve this? That's pretty easy. I'm going to multiply by x squared on both sides. And this is very easy. This is just a quadratic equation, so we're going to first FOIL. All right, combine like terms. And then set it equal to 0. All right, if it's factorable, factor. If you don't remember how to factor it, you can always use quadratic formula. I'm going to attempt factoring. Hopefully this works. Minus 2 minus 1, I think. Yes, that works. So solving it, x is equal to 1/2 or 2. But remember, we got to check domain. Domain says it's gotta be greater than 1. The only number that's, I'm sorry, the greater than 1 is 2. So the only answer is 2. All right, let's have you solve this one. You could, so I'm going to kind of talk about this before you start. You could move this to the left, but you don't need to. You can just combine this together and then move this 2 and then attempt to solve it. So go ahead and pause the video, give this a try, and then come back and check your answer. All right, so let's check this problem. So the first thing you need to do is still check the domain. The domain is x greater than 2, that being the picky eater. All right, so then you combine the two logs together, and then the one on the right, make sure you move the exponent. They both have a base, so yeah, they both have a base of 10, so that log you get rid of it. You got to set the equation equal to 0, and you realize you cannot solve this by factoring, so you need to use quadratic formula. Once you use the quadratic formula, you get two numbers, and then you double check against the domain because it's got to be greater than 2, so the only answer is 3.1098.